Here are 20 practice problems on main idea. As per usual, I'll link these questions and the answer key in the description. So if you want to work at it, you can go and do so. Or if you need a little bit more help, you can always refer back to this video because I will be going through all 20. And if you need further clarification or something like that, you can always shoot me a DM. Now, we've officially entered that 5 to 15 super hard and annoying set of questions on the reading SAT, and always do these last. Don't even bother trying to get the hard out first. You're gonna spend most of your time doing this, and then you won't have time for the easy questions. Now, when it comes to these questions, I'm not gonna lie, I don't really have that many tips for them. Like, I feel like the only way you can get better at them is just doing a lot of practice problems and eventually getting the hang of it, getting the flow, seeing some patterns, that type of stuff. So, I will link 20 more medium difficulty problems, because all these are hard difficulty. I'll link 20 more medium problems in the description with their answer key too. Now, when it comes to these types of problems, I think the best tip I could give you is just always try summarizing it in your own words. Whether you're doing the main idea or inferences or cross-text or whatever, always try summarizing it in your own words so you really understand it. Anyways, let's get started with question number 1. So for these types of questions, obviously there's gonna be a whole lot of reading. And I'm pretty sure y'all don't want to hear me yap for the next few minutes. So instead, I'll just go quiet and then you can read it at your own pace. And then we'll pick back up. Alright, let's look at our question. What does the text most strongly suggest about Sleep No More's use of its performance space? So they're asking about the performance space, and here if we look at the performance space, we know that it's this labyrinth venue, and there's these simultaneous interweaving narrative loops, and then as a result, it's impossible to experience it fully. And then there's some spatial fragmentation, and there's immense and intricate layouts. So we know that this performance space is super cool, alright? We got all these loops and intricate layouts, and then as a result, there's some spatial fragmentation going on, and that you can't experience it fully. So there's this super unique effect and experience for the audience. Now let's look at our answer choices and see what would match that. The choice of a New York City venue. Well, here, the fact that it's in New York City isn't relevant at all, so it's not gonna be A. B. Audience members find it disappointing? Well, not once does it ever mention them being disappointed, and if anything, it being super spatial fragmented and stuff would probably add on to that experience because it's super cool and stuff. I don't know what I'm saying anymore. Alright, C. It depends on a particular environment and would be difficult to reproduce. I mean, yeah, it's talking about how it has a super intricate layout and that there's all these loops and stuff, so it would make sense that it'd be hard to reproduce. So our answer might be C. And then D, not once does it ever mention an itinerary in the text, so it's not going to be D either, and our best answer would be C. Question number 2. Once again, feel free to pause and read at your own pace. Alright, based on the text, how do people in the capital of Mexico most likely regard Dr. Mausufrido? So we know that this Dr. Mausufrido, he's an archbishop, and that he carries a lot of family secrets. Then it starts describing his hat, and at the very end, it says how the family secrets do not fly out. So it's basically saying that this guy, he has a lot of secrets, and he doesn't go babbling, alright? He doesn't go telling everyone the secrets. So let's look at our answer choices. Many have come to tolerate him despite his disheveled appearance. I mean, it talks about how he has this funny looking hat, but never ever does it say that he's disheveled, so it's not gonna be A. B. Few feel concerned that he will divulge their confidences. And this is right, because here, it says that he'd be keeping the family secrets, so it makes sense that people wouldn't be worried that he'd spill their secrets too. So it might be B. Let's look at C. Some dislike how he freely discusses his own family. That's literally the exact opposite of what the text says. The text says that he be keeping the secrets, alright. And then D. Most would be unimpressed by him were not for his professional expertise. I mean, it says that he's an archbishop once right here, but never again does it even mention his expertise or whatever. So it's not gonna be D either. That means our best answer would be B. Question number 3. Once again, feel free to pause and read. Alright, so here the question asks us to find the main idea. So let's just quickly summarize what the text says. It talks about animal studies and observing animals in their natural habitat and also observing them in a lab. Then it says that each approach has advantages and disadvantages. And then it says that if the results from both types of studies contradict each other, it could be because they fail to account for some factor. Now let's look at our answer choices and see what would match. Let's look at it. Here, it says that the study in the natural habitat is more likely than the lab study to have accurate results. So here A says that the natural habitat is better than the lab study. But in the text, it never says that. The text only says that, yeah, both of them have their advantages and disadvantages. It never directly says that one is better than the other. So it's not going to be A. Let's look at B. Here it says that it's likely to yield conflicting results. Now, in the text, it does say that it could potentially have contradicting results, but it only says it for example. It only introduces it as a hypothetical. It say like, this potentially could happen. It doesn't say that it's always gonna happen. So, right here, the word likely makes this answer choice wrong. See? It says that it can be studied in the natural habitat and lab, and then it says that each has drawbacks that could affect the findings. And that's right. The text talks about how it has advantages and disadvantages. So C could potentially be our answer. Ooh, that's so funky looking out. And then D. It says that it's an indication that the studies had design flaws that affected the accuracy. That's not what the text says. The text says that it could be that they failed to account for some factor, not that the studies have design flaws. So D is not going to be our answer either, and our best answer will be C. Question number 4. Once again, feel free to pause and read. Alright, so here our question asks us, how does Lord Chancellor respond to the crowd? So let's quickly summarize the text. Here we have this guy who's asking who roared for the subwarden. And then everyone starts shouting, but they're just shouting random things. One guy's shouting bread, one guy's shouting taxes, and no one knows what they want. Alright, they're just all saying random things at this point. They're just all screaming. Then we have the Lord Chancellor, and he finally wakes up. And he's asking, what does it mean? He's asking, why are these people shouting? Alright? But he thinks that it's with unanimity, which basically means with agreement. Alright? He thinks that they're all shouting for the same thing. Now, let's look at our answer choices and see what would make sense. Here, he does ask about the meaning of the crowd shooting. Or shouting, not shooting, my bad. Alright, he does ask what does it mean. But he never claims to know what the crowd wants. So, it's not gonna be A. Let's look at B. He indicates a desire to speak to the crowd. He never ever says in the text that he wants to speak to them. He's just asking, why are all these people shouting? And then the crowd also never asks to speak to the subwarden. Alright? They're just shouting bread and taxes for whatever reason. Who knows? Let's look at C. He expresses sympathy for the crowd's demands. Yeah, he never expresses sympathy, and it also never says that the shouting annoys him. So it's not gonna be C either. And let's look at D. He describes the crowd as being united. That's true, because right here he says it's with unanimity. And then it says that even though the crowd clearly appears otherwise, and that's also true, because right here it says that they don't know what they're even shouting for. So our answer will be D. Question number 5. Once again, feel free to pause and read. Alright, so here the question asks us, what's an advantage of attaching glass beads to particles when using optical tweezers? Now here in the very last sentence, we see that these researchers, they use glass beads because they allowed the light to focus on the beads instead of the particles. So these glass beads are taking the focus of light away from the particles, and thus the particles don't overheat. Now let's look at our answer choices and see what best fits. For A, it never says that it decreases the time. It just says that it's taking the focus of light. So it's not going to be A. For B, it facilitates the maneuvering of particles without directly heating the particles themselves. This one is true. The key point here is not that it's facilitating the maneuvering or whatever, it's that it's not directly heating the particles. And that is true. That's what the glass beads are doing. They're taking the focus of light away from the particles, and now these particles aren't getting heated. So this might be our answer. C, it allows researchers to use weaker light beams. Once again, it never says that, so it's not going to be C. And then D, it adds a material to which particles can transfer any heat absorbed. It only says that these glass beads take the focus of light. It never says that it's transferring heat or doing any of that. So it's not going to be D either. And our best answer will be B. Question number 6. Once again, feel free to pause and read. Alright, so here the question asks us to find the main idea. So let's summarize the text. Here we have this person who's studying negative disconfirmation, which is just when something doesn't meet your expectations. Now, specifically, they're studying smart home technology, which attracts people with high expectations, but then of course, it never meets their expectations, so they feel a little disappointed. But these researchers, they actually found out that the users of smart home technology, they're doing some special techniques here to mitigate those feelings of disappointment, alright? So even though it didn't meet their expectations, they're employing some cognitive mechanisms, they're doing some fancy stuff, and as a result, they're not as disappointed anymore. They're not as sad. So let's look at our answer choices and see what best matches. Here in A, it says that these users will not achieve a feeling of satisfaction. That's actually the exact opposite of what the text says. It says that these users, they're reversing their sense of disappointment. So basically, they are feeling satisfied. So it's not going to be A. B, smart home technology is aimed at meeting or exceeding users' high expectations. It never says that. Now, it does say that smart home technology attracts users with high expectations, but it never says that it's aimed at meeting or exceeding those expectations. So it's not going to be B either. C, users with high expectations can feel content with technology even after experiencing negative disconfirmation. That's exactly what our text said here in this very last sentence. That they reverse their sense of disappointment, so they're still being happy, even though they got a little, like, it didn't meet their expectations. So it might be C. And then D, it never talks about how often it's been studied, or it never talks about the frequency of it being studied. That's completely irrelevant. So it's not going to be D, which means our best answer will be C. Question number 7. Now, before you start reading, I just want to point out that you're going to read this chunk of text first, and then this chunk of text. Alright, feel free to pause and read. Okay, so here the question is asking us to find the main purpose of the text, but we're going to do the same thing that we've been doing, which is just summarizing it. So here we know that the speaker is addressing a certain black author, and he describes this black author as a person that has read the hearts and souls of men. So this person really understands people. I mean, he can dig deep into their hearts and truly understand their feelings. Like, I bet his woman must love him, alright? And then it also talks about how he's told of joy and mirth. So not only is he good at understanding people, he's also a good talker. He's describing all these people's stories. And then to add on to that, it also talks about how he's read the language of flowers. So he didn't really read the language of flowers, but it talks about how he understands nature. And that he understands nature a lot, even to the point that a little book responded to his call. So he's getting busy with people here, and he's also getting busy with nature as well. Like, dang, he's super understanding of people and nature. So let's look at our answer choices and see what would make the most sense. A. To praise a certain writer for being especially perceptive regarding people and nature. Yeah, that's like exactly what I just went on that whole like little. Anyways, this might be our answer. B. That he's read extensively about a variety of topics. I mean, yeah, in the text it does say that he read and read, but it doesn't mean that he's like actually reading books or anything like that. It's speaking metaphorically, so it's not gonna be B. C. To call attention about his detailed writing process. It doesn't go into detail describing this author's writing process, so no. And then D. To recount fond memories. Yeah, this guy is not reminiscing on old memories with this guy or anything. But I mean, like, I feel like he definitely could. If this guy's that understanding, like, he'd be someone that I'd open up to. Anyways, our answer is gonna be A. Question number 8. Once again, feel free to pause and read. Alright, so here the question is asking us what best describes the moon with the eccentric orbit. So first things first, let's summarize the text. We know that moons that orbit in the same direction the planet spins have prograde orbits, and that moons that orbit in the opposite direction the planet spins have retrograde orbits. Then we know we have this one special moon that is not a remnant of a body that orbited Saturn, and that this special moon has a prograde orbit. However, its orbit is still super weird, and that may mean that it has a different origin than the other moons. So just to recap, we have this one special moon that has a super weird orbit even though it's a prograde orbit, which means that it might have a different origin. Now, let's see what our answer choices are and see what would best make sense. It doesn't have a retrograde orbit, that is true, but has the same origin? Nope. Right here it says it has a different origin, so it's not going to be A. B. Its orbit is so tilted, it never talks about it being tilted, it just says it's super weird, so it's not going to be B. C. It has a prograde orbit, that's true, but it's the result of having collided with another body orbiting Saturn, that's not true. Now, all it says is that it has a different origin. It never said what that origin is, so all of this here is just some random made up stuff that was never mentioned in the text. And then D, it has a prograde orbit, that's true. It may not be a remnant of an earlier body that orbited Saturn, that's true. That's exactly what this sentence right here says. Okay, well, I don't want to circle the rest of that, but it's that sense. So our answer will be D. Question number 9. Once again, feel free to pause and read. Alright, so here it just asks us for the main idea, so let's quickly summarize the text. We know that this poem is gonna be addressed to a friend as if they were physically present, so we know that this friend isn't really there. And then it talks about how here this guy is super tired and he's trying to go to bed to sleep. But then he just starts daydreaming in his head, alright? He's thinking about traveling to meet his friend, and as a result, he's still awake and he can't fall asleep. So this guy's daydreaming about his friend instead of going to sleep. Alright, let's see what best matches in our answer choices. Oops. Alright, here, the speaker is not asleep. Alright, here it says that his eyelids are open wide, so he's not asleep, which means A is not our answer. B, he's planning an upcoming trip. No, I mean, he's like thinking of like having a little pilgrimage there, but he's not like actually planning to go there. See? He's too fatigued to continue a discussion with the friend. Well, his friend isn't even there. Like, he's not actually even there. So, like, how could he even be talking to him in the first place? You know what I'm saying? So, C is not our answer. And then D, he's thinking about the friend instead of immediately falling asleep. That's exactly what this very last part says. So our answer will be D. Question number 10. Once again, feel free to pause and read. Alright, so here the question is asking us, what does the text most strongly suggest about the disco genre? So first things first, let's go ahead and summarize the text. So here it says that people really like making fun of disco, but these scholars are arguing that hey look, this genre isn't as superficial as you think. Then it gives an example of this one disco icon who does have a lot of songs associated with love and heartbreak, which isn't unique to disco, but that she also has these other songs that reflects concerns about community and identity. Then also says that these concerns of community and identity are also present in many other disco songs. So, let's look at our answer choices and see what best makes sense. A. It has been unjustly ignored by most scholars. That's the exact opposite of what the text says. If anything, these scholars are trying to advocate for disco, not ignoring it. So it's not going to be A. B. It evolved from a superficial genre focused on romance to a genre focused on more serious concerns. No, that is not what the text says at all. This text is just talking about how it's not as superficial as people believe, not that it is a superficial genre. So it's not going to be B. C. It has been unfairly dismissed for the inclusion of subject matter that is also found in other musical genres. This one is true. It has been dismissed because people do make fun of it, and the inclusion of subject matter that would be love and heartbreak, and it also says how this love and heartbreak isn't just unique to disco. It's also found in other musical genres, so this does perfectly match up with these first two sentences. So this might be our answer. And then D, it gave rise to black women's musical tradition that has endured even though the genre itself faded in the late 20th century. That's just a whole bunch of babbling, alright? Black woman and musical tradition, that's not relevant to what the text is saying at all. So D is not our answer, which means C is our best answer. Question number 11. Once again, feel free to pause and read. Alright, so here the question is asking us what does the text most strongly suggest about conventional fabrication? So, let's quickly summarize our text. Here it says that conventional fabrication can result in a loss of up to 80% of the solution, and as a result, it costs more to manufacture at scale. However, there is this new method, which is spray coat fabrication, and it's more reproducible, concise, and practical. So we have this conventional fabrication, which can take a lot of money when you're doing it at a large scale, but then you have this new and better approach, which is spray coating. So let's look at our answer choices and see what would best make sense. It is less suitable for manufacturing large volumes of cells than an alternative method. That is true. It says that it's super expensive to do at a large scale, and then it does say that there's this alternative method, which is spray coating. So A might be our answer. B is more expensive when manufacturing at scale than are processes for fabricating ETOs used in other solar cell architectures. Now, it is more expensive, that is true. However, the text never mentions any other solar cell architectures or whatever those thingies are, so it's not going to be B. C. It typically entails a greater loss of nanoparticle solution than do other established approaches for ETO fabrication. Now, it does have a pretty big loss of solution, as an 80% loss. However, the text doesn't mention other established approaches of fabrication. It does mention this one spray coating one, but other than that, it never talks about other approaches. So it's not going to be C. And then D, it is somewhat imprecise and limits the potential effectiveness. That's just a whole bunch of random babbling, alright? The text also never ever mentions that. So our best answer will be A. Question number 12. Once again, feel free to pause and read. Alright, so here the question is asking us to find the main idea, so let's just summarize it. We know that this Juan Pablo guy, wrote this little letter right here, letter to the Spanish Americans, and it led to some independence movements. However, this would have never really been that important had it not been to this one Miranda guy who who got the letter. And then as a result, he helped circulate the letter, so he was spreading word around, and he also helped edit the letter. So let's look at our answer choices and see what would make the most sense. The original authorship is disputed? No. I mean, it straight up says right here that having written, and then this guy right here. Oh, if y'all notice, this is a modifier, and you can see that having written modifies the noun Juan Pablo. So we know that Juan Pablo is the guy that wrote it, right? There's no disputing going on here. So it's not gonna be A. B. The majority of the most eloquently stated arguments were written by Miranda. That one's also gonna be a no. I mean, we already know that Juan Pablo was the guy that wrote it, and it only says that Miranda helped edit it. It never said that he wrote the majority of it. Plus, the text never goes and says who wrote the best stuff. So it's not gonna be B. C. He played a crucial role in influencing the content and distribution of this letter. And this one is true, because right here it says he helped circulate the letter, so he did help distribute it. So our answer might be C. And then D. This letter persuaded many people to pursue national independence. I mean, it says once right here that it's considered a forerunner for the independence movements, but it really never goes in depth about this topic right here, so it's not gonna be D, which means that our best answer is C. Now, one thing I do want to point out is that whenever you have these really long paragraphs, and if you're kind of not good at reading, there is a little trick. So if these paragraphs ever have a contrast word, so right here, it's gonna be the word but, the main idea is always gonna follow it. So here we have our contrast word, which is but, and that means our main idea is that Vizcarro's role in history would have remained insignificant were it not for Venezuelan revolutionary Francisco de Miranda, who was handed the unpublished letter after Vizcarro's death. So basically, it's saying that this Miranda guy had a super important role to play in history. And that does match up with what our answer got. It said that he played a crucial role. So there you go. Question number 13. Once again, feel free to pause and read. Alright, so here the question is asking us, what does the text most strongly suggest about corals that produce bright colors? So first things first, let's summarize the text. We know that these coral species really like algae, and that they appear brown when they have algae because the algae helps keep them healthy. Now, there might be some conditions and these algae could die or be expelled, and then these corals now turn white. Now, these corals, they need the algae to stay healthy. So, to try and attract algae, they turn bright. Let's look at our answer choices and see what would make the most sense. A. These corals have likely been subjected to stressful environmental conditions. This one is true. I mean, they went through these stressful environmental conditions, so they lost their algae. And now, they want to get their algae back, so they turn bright. So this might be our answer. B. They're more vulnerable to exposure from sunlight. This is actually the exact opposite of what the text says. Here it says these bright colors actually block intense sunlight, which means they would be less vulnerable to exposure from sunlight. So our answer isn't B. C. They have likely recovered from an environmental event without the assistance of algae colonies. Yeah, that's just a whole babbling, alright? It never says this in the text, so it's not gonna be C. Then D. These corals are more likely to survive without algae colonies than bow corals are. Once again, this is just a whole bunch of babbling. I mean, they turn bright because they want algae, not that they're independent and can go without algae. So it's not gonna be D, which means that our best possible answer is going to be A. Question number 14. Once again, feel free to pause and read. Alright, so here the question is asking us, why was Wang and his team's discovery of this fossil significant? So first things first, let's summarize our text. We know that for many years the only existing fossil evidence of Mixoterids came from 4 species living on the paleocontinent of Laurisia. But then we found this new discovery that expands our understanding of the geographical distribution of these Mixoterids because they found this new fossil remain of a new Mixoterid species on the continent or on the paleocontinent of Gondwana. So basically, for a super long time, we only knew that these Mixoterids lived on Laurisia. But now, we found new fossils that gives evidence that these Mixoterids also lived on Gondwana, alright? What are these names? Anyways, let's look at our answer choices and see what would make the most sense. A. The fossil constitutes the first evidence found by scientists that Mixoterids lived more than 400 million years ago. Now, here it does say that they did live over 400 million years ago, but that was with our second piece of evidence. Alright, we don't know when this very first one was found. Plus, once again, it's significant because it expands our understanding of geographical distribution. We don't care about like the age or whatever. So it's not gonna be A. B. The fossils help establish that Mixoterids are more closely related to these thingies. Yeah, no, like this is never said in the text. Plus, once again, we only care about the geographical distribution, alright? We don't care about their pedigree and how closely related they are. C. It establishes a more accurate timeline of the evolution. Once again, it never even mentions evolution once in the text. Plus, we don't care about evolution, we only care about the geographical distribution. So it's not going to be C. And then D, it constitutes the first evidence found by scientists that these thingies existed outside the paleocontinent of Laurisia. And that is exactly what the text says. It says they existed on Gondwana as well. Plus, it also mentions geographical distribution because it's talking about like where they live geographically, if you know what I'm saying. Anyways, the best answer would be D. Question number 15. Once again, feel free to pause and read. Alright, so the question asks us just to find the main idea. So let's go ahead and summarize this. Here it says that people think that breeds are more likely to have certain personality traits. And they think that, oh, these types of dogs are affectionate and these types of dogs are easy to train. But this person did a little study and they found that behavior varies widely among dogs of the same breed. So they basically said that, guess what? Certain breeds don't affect personality traits. So let's look at our answer choices and see what makes the most sense. A. Dog breeds would not exist without many years of human intervention in dogs' reproduction. Yeah, no. All the text says is that humans crossbred dogs for physical appearances. It never says that dogs wouldn't exist at all if we never crossbred them. So no. B. Research fails to confirm a commonly held belief about dog breeds and behavior. This one is true. This commonly held belief is that breeds affect personality traits. But of course, research says that's actually not true. So this might be our answer. C. The dog breeds most popular among owners have often changed. It never talks about which dog breed is the most popular. I mean, it does say that they have certain breeds for certain physical appearances, but it never talks about which one people like the most. So it's not going to be C. And then D, a study of dog breeds is notable for its usage of both opinion surveys and DNA sequencing. It does say once that these people, when they conducted this study, they used surveys and DNA sequencing, but they only said that once. It never mentions it again, so it's not going to be D either, which means that our best answer choice is going to be B. Question number 16. Once again, feel free to pause and read. Alright, so here the question is asking us to find the main idea, so let's summarize our text. Here it says that it's been widely accepted that the cerebellum, I don't know how you say it, coordinates motor control. And since we know that, no one really cares about what else it does. However, new research has found that the cerebellum also regulates emotion and social behavior. And then that's backed up by this newfound evidence right here. So let's look at our answer choices and see what makes the most sense. The recent verification of a pathway between the VTA and cerebellum confirms the cerebellum's long suspected role in motor coordination. This one's not true. First, we already know that the cerebellum does coordinate motor control. And then, this verification of a pathway, that doesn't confirm motor coordination, rather it confirms the regulating of emotion and social behavior. So it's not going to be A. B. Recent advances in the field of neuroscience have challenged widely accepted claims. That's just not true. There's no challenging of claims going on here. All it says is that the cerebellum does this one thing, and then they found out it also does another thing. They never challenge anything. So it's not gonna be B. Well, how much time did I say B? Not gonna be B. Oh, never mind. C. The cerebellum has primarily been thought to regulate motor functioning, but in recent years, neuroscience researchers have been uncovering additional functions. That's perfect. Right here, it says that it controls motor control. Wait, it coordinates motor control. And then right here, it says that there's additional functions. So it might be C. And then D, technological limitations. Not once does the text ever mention technological limitations. So it's not going to be D, which means that our best possible answer is C. Question number 17. Once again, feel free to pause and read. Alright, so here the question is asking us to find the main idea. So first things first, let's summarize our text. Here it says that scholars have argued that certain conditions in England in the 9th through 11th centuries give pretty good reason and evidence that this poem was written during that time period. Then it goes on to say that these other scholars are thinking that, hey look, you give a pretty good reason, alright? Like, it does make sense that that poem could have been written back then. But at the same time, why are you looking at just that one piece of evidence, when there's actually this other piece of evidence that says, hey, this poem could have been written even earlier, or in the 8th or 7th century? So, let's look at our answer choices and see what would make the most sense. Here in A, it says that, alright, it does make sense that it could have been written in the 9th and 11th centuries, but that advocates tend to rely on evidence that has been called into question. Now that's just not true. It never says that this evidence is unreliable or anything. They're just saying that, hey look, you need to acknowledge this other piece of evidence first. So it's not gonna be A. And then B, it says that, alright, this poem was written in the 9th through 11th centuries, but then it gives a controversial interpretation of the social conditions. Alright man, it never ever says social conditions or anything like that in the text. So it's not gonna be B. And then C, it says all of this poem fits well with the historical context of England in the 9th through 11th centuries. It fits equally as well with the historical context of England in the 7th and 8th centuries. That's just a whole bunch of babbling. Like, I don't know what to say. Like, it never talks about the historical context, let alone it being fitting equally as well, or anything stupid like that. So it's not gonna be C. And then D, it says that, hey look, it is pretty possible that this poem could have been written in the 9th through 11th century, but you still need to address other evidence that says that it could have been written earlier. And that is exactly what the text says right here, that they still need to justify their evidence a little more and justify why the evidence is better than this other piece of evidence. So the answer that makes the most sense is D. Alright guys, sorry if that question was a little hard, because I'm not gonna lie, the first time I did this, which was like a month ago, I don't even remember. I had no idea what I was reading. Like this has to be the hardest question on the entire document. So hopefully I explained it in a way that y'all could understand, but if you didn't, always reach out to me if you have any questions, alright? Question number 18. Once again, feel free to pause and read. Alright. So here the question is asking us, what does the text most strongly suggest about the site discovered by the researchers? So first things first, let's summarize that text. Here it says that these paleontologists have found this mine in Brazil that has all of these eggs, alright? Then they found that these eggs belonged to these titanosaurs, and that these eggs, it's super significant that we found them because it's the first time ever that they were found in the northern regions of South America. So let's look at our answer choices and see what makes the most sense. A is the earliest known example. In the text, it literally does not mention a date a single time. Alright, it never once mentions when they found them. Not to mention, we don't know about other discoveries, alright? We don't know what the other discoveries were found. So it's not gonna be A. B, it was very difficult to excavate. Once again, it never talks about any challenges they had. It never talks about how hard it was. So it's not gonna be B. C, it may have been occupied by other sauropods. This one's also not true. It only mentioned sauropods once, and that was to describe that, hey look, these titanosaurs are sauropods, and that's it. It never mentions other sauropods once, let alone them being occupied by them. So, not gonna be C. And then D, it is farther north than any other testing site, and that is true, because here it says in the text that there was a lack of known nesting sites in northern regions. So these guys don't be laying their eggs in the northern regions. So our best answer would be D. Question number 19. Once again, feel free to pause and read. Alright, so here the question asks, how are polarons believed to be involved in the superfluorescence observed in these people's study? So here in this text, it says that these electrical charges emit light in synchronized bursts only when it's extremely cold. However, in this study, these people observed those bursts at room temperature using these specific films out of these materials. So let's look at answer choices and see what best matches. A. Polarons enable these bursts to cross from one material to another. Alright, never in the text does it talk about these bursts, they're all of a sudden they're moving across and stuff, so it's not gonna be A. B. Polarons allow these thingies to synchronize despite higher temperatures, and this one is true, because here in the text it says that normally it only happens when it's extremely cold, but now it happens at room temperature as well, so it's a little higher in temperature. So B might be our answer. C. It accelerates the release of bursts. It never talks about how it's being accelerated, or even the speed, so it's not going to be C. And then D. It decreases the intensity. Never talks about how the intensity is being decreased, so our best answer will be B. Question number 20. And before you start reading, I just want to point out that you're going to read like this, and then this, and then so on and so forth. So feel free to pause and read. Alright, so here the question is asking us, what challenge do humans sometimes experience? So first things first, let's summarize our text. Here it just goes talking about how, well, here it's a thoughts in a zoo, right? So here what's happening is that it's comparing us to zoo animals, alright? They in their crew traps and we in ours. So it's basically saying that they're in their own little engagement, and then we're also, as humans, kind of locked up. And then here it keeps going on about how man has a little profit in exchange, and how our cages have a larger range, so that we're all just like animals, we have our own cages, but our cages are a little bit bigger. And then we have this line with this untamed heart, whatever, whatever. But what's really important is these last two lines right here, where it says that there's some lofty soul in dreams and visions wrapped, but in the stifling flesh securely trapped. So what this means is that our soul is wrapped in these dreams and visions, alright? Our soul and our mind likes to dream and have all of these aspirations that we want to reach, but we're trapped in our flesh. So like thinking like, I believe I can fly, type of stuff, but then of course our flesh, we can't do that. So let's look at answer choices and see what makes the most sense. They cannot tame certain wild animals because of a lack of compassion. What? Uh, what? What? I mean, yeah, it says that this lion has an untamed heart, so we didn't tame animals, but no, that's not. That's not. We're not. It never mentions how humans have a lack of compassion, and it never talks about us trying to tame animals in the first place. So, not gonna be A. And then B, they cannot focus on setting attainable goals because of a lack of motivation. No, it never mentions how we have a lack of motivation. It just says that we're stuck in a cage. So it's not gonna be B. C. They quickly become frustrated when faced with difficult tasks because of a lack of self-control. Alright, none of this talks about us getting frustrated or any lack of self-control. So it's not gonna be C. And then D. They have aspirations that cannot be fulfilled because of certain limitations. And that's exactly what these last two lines say. How we have all these dreams, but we're trapped. So the best answer will be D. Alright guys, that was 20 practice problems on main idea, and I'm not gonna lie, I'm like super burnt out now. All these paragraphs, like, my head hurts. And I think you can tell that the longer the paragraphs, right, like the more words a question has, the harder it will be. Especially this one, right? Like, there's a whole paragraph itself, and then each question is also a paragraph. So, I hope y'all get now that please save these for last, alright? Because if you do these first, or if you do it like in order, but you're gonna be so burnt out by the time you get to punctuation. And then punctuation is so easy, but you'll not only will you be out of time because you spent so much time trying to read, you'll also be super burnt out and you don't want to do anything anymore. So please, 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 always save these main idea questions as well as the other ones, the inferencing and all that, for last. And other than that, always remember to summarize your text after you finish reading so you can further understand it. And then also, whenever here it has a contrast word, most of the time, well, if not always, I'm pretty sure always, your main idea will follow. So if you ever notice that your paragraph has a contrasting word, your main idea will be after that. And yeah, that's gonna be it, and I'll see ya.